Finally, we get to talk about something that I was very hyped about. And that's the 1990s TV show The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Not to be confused with The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, which is a re-edit of the entire show, which is the way it was released on VHS, DVD, and streaming services. So chances are, if you have seen this show, you have seen the Adventures re-edit by George Lucas, and not the original Chronicles version, which I don't think was ever physically released. But since I want to talk about this show, and I want to rewatch the show, because like most people, I watched it in the Adventures re-edits first, because that's the only thing that's readily available, and they are fine in that format. I'm probably gonna talk about that once I'm done with this original version of the show, but I just want to talk about all the episodes individually in the original format. So I have to rely on YouTube channels which have taken it upon themselves to recreate the original versions. And that just means they take the re-edits, because that footage is available, they cut out the scenes that Lucas later added, they put back in the old Indy bookends, and some of the audio was also changed in the edits. They reversed that. So a lot of work, goes into that. And I really appreciate the effort that these people put into that. So today I'm going to talk about the pilot episode, or kind of pilot movie. It is feature length. We're going to talk about Young Indiana Jones and the Curse of the Jackal. Directed by two people, Jim O'Brien and Carl Schulz, and released in March 1992. Okay, I'm not used to, just reviewing movies. I'm used to talking about them, but reviewing them like this on the channel, it's not my thing. I'm gonna make this brief and to the point. So let's quickly talk about the story. Basically, this TV movie introduces us to all three Indiana Jones actors that we're gonna have in this show. We have 90-year-old Indiana Jones with an eye patch, who bookends the show. He's in a segment at the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And he's in present day 1992, and he's telling two school kids about his adventures. So they learn something because they are bored in a museum. Okay, that's fun. Then we get the young Indy, played by Corey Carrier, who is 9 years old. And we get introduced to the plot that young Indy is traveling the world with his parents, because his dad, Henry Sr., is famous. He's gonna do a lecture tour around the world. And after picking a teacher, Miss Seymour, for young Indy, they go to Egypt first. And there we are also introduced to something that you better get used to if you want to get into this show. Indy meeting real life people. And not just like cameos, they play crucial parts in the story for the most part. In this story, 9-year-old Indy meets Lawrence of Arabia and Howard Carter during a dig in Egypt, and they find a tomb, but one of the people there gets murdered, and an artifact, the Jackal, gets stolen. And that's the plot in the Young Indy segment. And the Jackal doesn't get recovered, but then, after a break with old Indy, we get to the second half of the movie, which is 16-year-old Indy, played by Sean Patrick Flannery. And this story centers around teenage Indy going to Mexico with his cousin Frank, but Indy gets captured by the men of Pancho Villa because the revolution is going on, and he joins forces with them, essentially, and comes to believe in their cause, but over the course of his adventure he begins to learn, revolution is shit for the average people, and this is not his place. But he comes to the realization maybe he can do something in the Great War that is currently fought in Europe. So he makes friends with a Belgian guy called Remy, and together they decide, we're gonna leave Mexico, we're gonna go to Europe and fight in the Great War, we're gonna enlist. But before he leaves, while in Mexico riding with Pancho Villa's men, Indy has encountered the thief who stole the Jackal all those years ago in Egypt, who's now like an arms dealer. And before he leaves with Remy, Indy decides he's gonna take the Jackal back, finally. And we get a action scene, a final confrontation with the thief and murderer. And during this action scene, we get many classic Indy moments. Like, this is like the moment where Indy truly acts like the Indiana Jones we expect. Like, he basically has the whole dress down. Obviously, he has the fedora because he's 16. This is after the flashback in Last Crusade, obviously. He has the chin scar, which I want to mention because on my first viewing, I didn't notice it. But there's one close-up where, yeah, Sean Patrick Flannery, they put the scar on his chin, which is interesting. I didn't notice that on first viewing. Young Indy is using a whip in that action scene. It's fun. It's really, really fun. It feels like a Young Indy adventure. I think most people would say this second half is better than the first half, just because I think everybody agrees child actors are terrible. But I want to say the little kid Indy isn't annoying. I think the actor is doing a good job. I especially like the beginning when he meets his new teacher, Miss Seymour, and he's basically doing like a Harrison Ford impression as a 9-year-old. That was amusing. But I think the acting in general is pretty good in this. I think the actors I like the most are the guy who plays Henry Sr. because he has the Sean Connery voice down. Like, it's fucking amazing. I like Old Indy just because I just have a soft spot for Old Indy. Sean Patrick Flannery also does a good job, but something I can't unsee now after like reading reviews and stuff, he kind of feels like Marty McFly more than Indiana Jones. It makes sense enough. This is a young Indy, obviously, who still has a lot of like character growth and stuff to go through, but while watching I just couldn't get that comparison out of my head now. I would also say this movie looks pretty good. Something that they bragged about with this show, they shot on locations all around the world, which you can tell. This was a kind of big budget TV show, which was George Lucas' goal. He wanted to have like indie adventures, like big and bombastic kind of, which this one isn't really. At least the first half isn't, which makes sense because he's only 9 years old. The second half, yeah, that is more action heavy to a degree. But in general, I don't know if I would call it a criticism, but don't expect the Indiana Jones movie trilogy. Don't expect Raiders of the Lost Ark in here. Especially in terms of just the general pacing of the story. This feels slower. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but just keep that in mind. Overall, I would say this is a very decent start to a TV show, and it did leave me hyped for the next episode. You know, Indy now enlisting in the Great War. And that's when we get to some of the greatest episodes, in my opinion. But we will talk about that when we get to it. I mean, this first season only has 6 episodes, and next time we're gonna talk about the episode titled London, May 1916.